logistical help, and also to the Climate Emergency Collaboration Group, who have been steadfast supporters of all this work. Um, very importantly, also to uplift storytelling and the impacts of what does loss and damage really look like. So before we get started, we are really excited and honored to hear from we're in the Ghana Pavilion. So let's hear first from Abena Asamoah Okiere. I think I got that right. I was pronouncing with Abena. She's the technical advisor to the Minister for Finance and Economic Planning of the Republic of Ghana. So I'll let Abena take it over. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and you're welcome to the Ghana Pavilion. Today, we confront a reality, not a distant threat. Climate change is actively reshaping our world. Its impact is immediate, transforming the places we know as home. Africa stands as the most susceptible continent to climate change, bearing dramatic consequences, notably a surge in forced displacement. By 2050, it's projected that up to 86 million Africans might be internally displaced. Currently, Africa is already the epicenter of forced displacement, with about 30 million internally displaced people, refugees, and asylum seekers, nearly a third of the global refugee population. The continent experiences the highest rate of new internal displacements, exerting profound economic strains on individuals, communities, and entire economies. Focusing on Ghana and West Africa, the susceptibility and risk of climate-induced displacement are alarmingly high. In the last decade, over 162,000 Ghanaians have been internally displaced due to climate-related disasters like storms and floods, with significant displacement events in 2013, 2018, and 2021. We are in an era marked by loss and damage, with both the Global South and the Global North witnessing the limits of adaptation and how the climate crisis intensifies risks for communities lacking resources and social safety nets. The film screening at the Ghana and Climate Vulnerable Forum Pavilion is more than an event. It symbolizes our solidarity with climate refugees. We are uniting art, humanities, and storytelling in a collective effort for climate action and sustainable development across various forums. On behalf of the government of Ghana, I extend our deepest gratitude for your participation in advocating for a renewed climate commitment, one that genuinely reflects the challenges and realities faced in the global north. Thank you.
Thank you, Abna. I especially loved the solidarity with climate refugees. Thank you so much. So we're going to move right into our films, but we're very lucky because the director of the first film and a beautiful artist and person, Teo Orman-Skiping, is with us. So I'm going to let Teo introduce the first film, and I'll give you a quick snippet on the second. Teo.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this morning. I'd like to just add some additional thank yous as well. Firstly, thank you so much to Rosa Luxemburg, Stiftung New York, who have supported this film and made it possible. Thank you also to you for being here. Close to the microphone, thank you. I'm too tall, perhaps if I stand on here. This film has been made in collaboration with an actor called Moses Alexander, who's based in the UK, where I am as well. And really, the story is one of solidarity. Thank you very much. The film challenges us to imagine a future where instead of militarized borders, barbed wire fences, detention centers, people are welcomed, given the support they need when they face displacement following the climate crisis. But it doesn't just talk about solidarity, it also talks about responsibility and the responsibility of developed countries to provide the support that's needed for those who are being impacted. So without further ado, please enjoy the film, and thank you for being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Teo. It was such an honor to work on this film with Teo because he has a beautiful vision. The second film is by some filmmakers from London who are the producers and the directors for a series called Evolution Earth, which is a 5-part series that has already aired in the United States on public broadcast television. It'll air globally next year. Arte and Sky and Love Nature, and to my shocking surprise, they contacted me and I thought they just wanted a lot of background information, and conversations later, it turns out they actually wanted to tell a story about climate displacement in Morocco. So this is not what I do, but I ended up participating in this series with them, and it's not available for global distribution, but they are so committed to change as well that they've created a very special package for us that we're just screening here at COP. So the second series is called Evolution Earth, and this is episode 3, Heat. So we'll watch those right now, and then we'll have a short discussion with our amazing panel. Thank you so much.
which means that a person who has crossed a border due to the climate crisis doesn't qualify for protection and cannot seek asylum due to climate change. To be fair, maybe it's because the Refugee Convention was established in 1951 that it only offers protection to those fleeing conflict or facing political, social, racial, or religious persecution. But wasn't that 72 years ago? And hasn't a lot changed? Don't we now know that from just 1.1 degrees of heating, people are moving due to the climate crisis? Don't we now have the science, the data, the crystal clear examples like the devastating floods in Pakistan in which 8 million people were displaced? Isn't it clear that people are being forced to move and they need more support? And you know what? I'm starting to think that it's more than just an issue of legal recognition. You remember the border walls, the razor wires, the barking of dogs and the choking of tear gas? Well, something makes me think that some countries don't want people moving, don't want people asking for help, and don't want to answer for their historical responsibilities for the climate crisis. And that is a huge problem. It's a massive problem because as the world warms up, people are going to need to be moving to keep their heads above water, moving to access the support they need, and moving to find the strength to begin again. So, how do we right this massive climate injustice? Well, I've been thinking and I've got some ideas. What if we gave people the rights and services that they need when a climate disaster displaces them in their own country? Wouldn't that help them stay? And for those who have no choice but to cross borders, shouldn't we be creating safe, legal pathways for people to move instead of blocking them with walls and putting them in detention centres? Asylum processes which take just hours and not months or years to be approved. Wouldn't that mean that they don't have to rely on people smugglers? What about if we finally had a real conversation about international legal recognition for climate refugees? One where we didn't hide behind the political, our national interest or the growth of our economies. Where solutions could be found by upholding and sometimes updating international human rights laws. And you know what? We can create new regional and national laws that recognize and protect people crossing borders because of the climate crisis. And don't you think it's time to get the new loss and damage fund filled? Because shouldn't rich countries, companies and individuals most responsible for the climate crisis be paying their fair share? Paying up for loss and damage so that communities on the front lines can recover and rebuild. And wouldn't that also help them stay? And you know, there is something I think is equally as important. And it isn't to do with money, law, or policies. What about changing our minds? What about not being so quick to judge, quick to anger, or quick to assume? I mean, what if those of us who live in rich countries, instead of herding children into detention centres, placing crying men on planes, or sending families away to prison islands, started to recognise our historic responsibility, recognise our obligation, and recognise our privilege? Because don't we have a responsibility to love, to care, to welcome those forced to leave their home from a climate crisis they did little or nothing to cause? What do you think? Is this future out of reach? Or can we dig a little deeper and find a way to love, care for, and welcome those having to leave their homes due to the climate crisis? Don't you think that's something we could be proud of?
But everywhere we go, we're seeing that deserts are growing. Predictions currently estimate nearly 30 million acres of productive land are lost to droughts and desertification every year. Nowhere is that more intensely felt than here, back in the Sahara. It's one of the largest deserts in the world, and it's on the move. Already the size of the USA, it's been growing, advancing 2,900 square miles a year. Even the silver ants have a hard time, taking turns to excavate their home from the shifting sands.
Can you imagine a world where
But everywhere we go, we're seeing that deserts are growing. Predictions currently estimate nearly 30 million acres of productive land are lost to droughts and desertification every year. Nowhere is that more intensely felt than here, back in the Sahara. It's one of the largest deserts in the world. But everywhere we go, we're seeing that deserts are growing. Predictions currently estimate nearly 30 million acres of productive land are lost to droughts and desertification every year. Nowhere is that more intensely felt than here, back in the Sahara. It's one of the largest deserts in the world, and it's on the move. Already the size of the USA, it's been growing, advancing 2,900 square miles a year. Even the silver ants have a hard time, taking turns to excavate their home from the shifting sands. Out here, survival is about holding back the desert. In the south of Morocco, we visited a place that's facing the full brunt of our changing climate. This is Amali Tower. When you talk to her, you get a lifetime's experience about the resilience, not of animals, but of people surviving in an overheating world. She's spent the last 15 years documenting a growing refugee crisis in almost 20 countries.
The desert's taken over. You either see ruins like this because it's historical or because it's a war zone. I have never seen anything like this because of climate impacts.
This was and still is someone's home.
Today, it's a ghost town.
We can all see the desert encroaching and intruding. You see it, you feel it, you even taste it. There's sand in my teeth.
This is as visceral and as frontline as it gets in terms of climate change.
I can barely keep a conversation going. How does one exist in this?
There are a handful of families that are still here because they don't want to leave. Assalamu alaikum.
Amali talks with Lignawi Balade, who's living on the front line of this crisis.
هجماتنا الرملة كل غيبات الصبح حتى غلباتني سديت لها البيبان وطلعت ونصهم. هذا هو اللي لقيت مع الحل مع الرمل. ما غلباتنا غير الرملة. عندما نديروا لها مع العجاج قوية والنبات ما وقفش. صافي. العجاج والرملة تلاقاو بجوج صافي. حيط مبني هناك اللي يحبس الرملة ولكن غطات وداز فوق شوفي دينا صافي وبقينا نتمثل ما يمشي بنادم المدينة إلا ما مشى لها بنادم بكري راه كان اللي قضى عليه الولف حنا ولفناه هنا دوك واخا هذا ما عندنا وين نمشيو عليه هيا ما عندنا وين نمشيو عليه هنا اللي قدر لنا الله خلاص نرضوا به
بالعيد.
لا جميل لا جميل هيا صافي.
The few people that remain have told us how impossible it is to live here and how impossible it was to fight. People gave up. They gave up, and they left permanently.
The climate crisis is a migration crisis.
Last year alone, more than 3 times as many people were displaced by weather-related events than conflict or violence.
90% of the refugees today come from climate vulnerable countries. This is something that is happening now.
Climate change is eroding the tapestry of an entire population. This is cultural loss. That oral history that's lost, the indigenous knowledge that's not passed on.
And it's that cultural knowledge that Amali thinks is the answer. She believes the people have a secret.
Around the world, populations have lived for thousands of years in some of the harshest climates on the planet. They have historical indigenous knowledge. That knowledge contains solutions.
Amali wanted us to meet the people of Morocco, who are using the wisdom from nature passed down by their grandparents to fight back. One palm tree at a time, they're starting to hold back the desert.
في الاول جاو الوالدين ديالنا رحاله لقاو كلشي مزيان هنا فيه الخضوريه ديال البهايم بحال الجمال الشياه من بعد شافوا بحال اللي كلا التمر كيرمي علفه وكيتعطي التمر وكتكبر.
Les and Ubana's grandparents harnessed underground water to nurture a small oasis into what you see now. And what they learned is just as important today. Planting palm trees helps keep the sand at bay and the oasis alive.
فريده حنا في المنطقه كنقولوا اللي ما عندوش تمر في الدار كيتسمى ولادو بقاو الجوع.
Once established, date palms like this create shade and stop evaporation.
بحال فاش تكون الحراره قاصحه كترتب عليه شويه.
They even suck the water table up, benefiting other crops. The vegetation combines to create a microclimate that cools the whole oasis. It's a kind of virtuous circle. Most importantly, they form a barrier to the desert wind, preventing soil erosion and desertification.
These trees can become a self-sustaining source of food, income, livelihood, identity for this population that is losing all of those things. That means that feeds a family, that sustains a community, that provides a livelihood, and that fights back the elements of climate change. One of the first things I realized is you hear birds, you see butterflies, you see wildlife.
يعطيونا واحد الراحة في القلوب. هاد الطيور عايشين، هاد النخل عايشين، دابا هاد النخلة راه كتهضر معنا اللي عنده داك سميتو ديالو.
Across our planet, nature is providing solutions to desertification. On the southern edge of the Sahara, 11 countries are engaged in a mammoth undertaking. Their aim is to build an expansive 5,000-mile-long Great Green Wall from Djibouti to Senegal. % of the wall is already complete, with over 49 million acres of land already restored.
It's really just an incredibly beautiful story of resilience and adaptation. We have a choice over here of shore encroaching desert, and we have a choice over here of a verdant farm. With local solutions, with indigenous knowledge, with resilience, with innovation, we can fight back.
The effects of heat on this planet are increasingly part of all our lives. We need to reclaim nature's power to hold back the desert.
"30 years ago, this was a thriving community. Today, it's a ghost town. This village has been taken over by the impacts of climate change. The desertification, the desert, has taken over the village of Banu. We're at the edge of the Sahara, and I think people think that climate change impacts are something that are going to happen in the future. You either see ruins like this because it's historical or because it's a war zone. I have never seen anything like this because of climate impacts. And I've been to some places. I'm just awestruck. I'm quite dumbstruck, to be honest. This was and still is someone's home, someone's village. An entire community once lived here. I mean, what am I walking on? You know, am I walking on someone's roof, on someone's dining space once? Was this a child's bedroom? This is a home. Doesn't exist anymore because the sand has intruded. Climate change has intruded. 2 families are here because they don't want to leave. We spoke to one gentleman here, Bilaid, who told me that his house was engulfed in sand. I asked him, how did you manage to live in your home then with the sand coming in every day? He said, you know, there were snakes and scorpions. That's how much sand was accumulating in my house. And I know that the outlook doesn't look very good, but this is my home. I have nowhere left to go. There's no young people here because there's no life here. How do you live, you know, swallowed up by the sand? Everybody has migrated. This is a climate migration story. The younger generations have to go to urban centers. They have to find other work. They have to send money back to keep their families thriving or just eking out an existence. Those are the remittances through which the families that are still here are using to survive. Who we can learn so much from the time. So as I introduce you, if you wouldn't mind just coming up and we can start a conversation. So first of all, we have here with us Rose, climate justice advocate from Uganda, and it is really an honor to have you here with us, Rose. Thank you so much. We also have Roy Douglas Otieno. I saw you walk in. Hi, Roy. Who is the founder and executive director of Tinada from Kenya, and is also working on a working on displacement in Kenya with the platform for disaster displacement, which we'll hear more about. And we also have Shakirul Islam, who's the founding chair of OKUP, which is a grassroots migrants organization in Bangladesh. Thank you for being here, Shakirul. And lastly, we have Zinta Zomers here, who may or may not be in the room with us. Maybe Zinta will be joining us shortly, but Zinta, of course, is a climate science and practical lead at OCHA and the vice chair of the working group 2 at IPCC. So we'll just start a conversation, and if anyone sees Zinta, you know, you know where to send her. Thanks. Is this on? Okay. So thank you so much for being here. Really, really grateful for you sharing your time with us. Let me start with you, Shakirul, if you wouldn't mind grabbing that mic. So you have a really great report that just came out, which I read in great detail. And to summarize, the title actually says Migration is a Compulsion. And I'd love to hear you share stories of what you learned from interviewing people in the Sundarbans in Bangladesh. How is climate affecting these populations?
Thank you very much, and for giving me this space to share our ground experiences here with these audiences. As you said that, yes, we, being a migrant organization, actually have been working to bring the issue of migration and to understand the interconnections between migration and climate change. And the research that we have recently published, this is a longitudinal research, and it means that we actually conducted the research throughout the year to understand the differences in different seasons. For example, in winter, how the climate actually looked like in winter and what people do in that particular season, and when it is rainy season, what happens, and also the other season. So we traveled several times during the year in the community, stay in the community to understand the feeling about the chances of the climate and then the movement of the people. And we found that 92% of people in Bangladesh, particularly in that mangrove Sundarbans, they face cyclones in every year. And it's not the wind that they face, and sometimes, the cyclone brought the saline, the high tide, storm surges, and destroy everything. And flood is very common in that particular area. And I want to focus on salinity, because of the intrusion of river water and the saline water into the community. It's very severe, and 72% people in that particular area saying that they have been affected by salinity. Riverbank erosion is another issue. 70% families say that they have been victim of river erosion, and at this moment they don't have any homeland, they don't have farmland, so they become the landless. And erratic rainfall is really, really very critical at this moment. I went to the area in July last year, and I found that the farmers were waiting. They don't have any work. And I asked, what is the reason? And they said that, yes, the rainy season has been started already, but there is no rain. And they are waiting for the raining to start their cultivation, because the water on the surface and the ground all are saline, and they don't have anything to do without raining. And the people depend on the rain water for drinking, and for the daily uses, they use the saline water, and that has a very critical impact on the lives and livelihoods and also well-being. And if I give a particular reference, particularly on the women health issues for using the saline water day after day, I mean, it has impact on the reproductive health, and it has a very critical consequences in the life of the women in that particular area. On the other hand, it has a very critical impact on the adolescent girls. And because of using the saline water, their skin gets older, even in their early 20s. And that's why many families actually marry their young girl at early ages, even before 18, because after 20 they become they look like more older than their age. And when the early marriage happens, there are a lot of consequences, then the early pregnancy. And if it is early pregnancy, there are many complications. And there are a lot of cases that the girl died during the delivery. On the other hand, because of the early marriage, there is also conflict after 2-3 years of marriage, and then many girls become divorced even before they become 20s, and the whole life they need to stay alone. And in our society, being a woman, divorcee women staying alone, it's a big stigma. It's an issue of sexual harassment. It's the issue of many things. And there is all these are invisible consequences and invisible, how can I explain it? It's loss and damages, and there is no way how we will calculate in terms of monetary losses and damages. So all these actually force people, compelled people to leave leave their home to find a better place to live in. And our research is saying that there is very little viable options for the people in the community to live in, especially in regards to the livelihoods. So they simply depend on taking loans to rebuild their houses or rebuild their livelihood options, but they cannot continue because the next disaster comes and destroy their efforts. And that's why they fall into a debt trap. And when they are in a debt trap, they have no way but compelled to leave. And when they leave, majority of live within the country, mostly in different seasons to work, to find work. For example, in winter, they go to the Brooklyn for six months to work and earn money. And during the harvesting seasons, they also migrate in different districts. But there is also a new trend of people migrating internationally. And our research find that there is a increase of 65% sharp increase of international migration compared to the last 1 year. So it means that the people who, migrated into 2022, and if we compare the people who migrated internationally in September 2023, it's a 60% increase. And when these people are migrating, there is no protection, there is no legal pathway, there is no regular, opportunities to migrate. So when they migrate within the country, even in the case of internal migration, they fall into informal category of work. And in our labor law, informal work is excluded. So that's why even if they face discrimination in getting salary and forcing long work, but they don't have any way to file complaints and get compensation and remedies. And if I talk about the international migration, I'll say that it's a huge violation of rights. And most of the people coming into the Middle East, because they are using the labor migration corridor, and when they are in the destination country, they don't have any work permit, they don't have any work, and nothing. So they're putting into the situation of forced labor and human trafficking situation, and there is no way to move out of.
Thank you so much. It's true. What we have to rethink how we think about labor migration. When you look at the countries of origin, are countries that are on the front lines of the climate crisis, and this region is very illustrative of that reality. I want to take what you said about cross-border migration and turn over to Roy. I know that you're from Kenya, in Kisumu. I would love to hear you talk a bit more about what are you seeing in Kenya, both internally in terms of people being forced to flee both flooding and drought, but also across borders. How is Kenya managing this, given that there is more cross-border cooperation in this region, which I think is a solution and the kind of leadership we need to see elsewhere in the world. And also maybe if you could quickly tell us about the work you're doing with the Platform for Disaster Displacement.
Thank you so much. People are using nature and we are not conserving it. We are benefiting from nature, but we are not benefiting nature. And that is why we have climate change issues. And that's why there's a lot of displacement. According to the research that we did in 2019 and to date, it reveals categorically that in Kenya, the topmost issues of climate change is flood. Number one, flood is topping all over, then followed by drought. Somebody will definitely ask, why flood, why not drought? We have a prolonged drought and a short-term floods. But when floods comes even for a day, it affects bigger population. When it rains even for 5 days, it affects the entire population. And along Kisumu and along western and also Asal areas, the northeastern, right now floods really affect so many people, and so many people die, and we lose a lot of crops. And this brings about the issue of migration. How are we coming on board? As TINADA Youth Action Africa, we are working with PAMAD to ensure that we pick the stories and we pick the data. And we use this data to tell the government on the increasing migration and how this could be sorted out. We are working with different civil society organizations and young organizations and communities. But above all, we are bringing on board the issue of mental health, because mental health is cutting across. Anytime there's a migration, mental health of individuals are affected. So we are ensuring that we bring the issue of mental health prevention, mental health response, and mental health therapy, plus the research that comes with it. Migration is a big issue in Kenya because there's also conflict of border conflict. The communities are fighting themselves. And when this happens, people migrate. But this affects number of young people. In Kenya, we have a big population of young girls who are getting married because of that, because they migrate, then the other day what they can do is to get married. Then they will come back later with 6 or 12 children, minus the husband. But that the people who are suffering because they have to take care of these children. This is where we are also coming in to ensure that we take care of the well-being of young people. We have extreme drought and extreme floods, and these normally affect a big population. When I was young, where I come from, we are next to River Nyando that goes to Lake Victoria. And you will definitely see that by the time I was young, I was around 5, I was not able to see River Nyando. It was 1 kilometer away because there were a lot of trees and wild animals inside. Right now, when I stand at our home, I will see River Nyando. The community are affecting the environment. They are cutting down the trees. And that's why I say that we are using the nature, but we are not conserving the nature. As we give, we also need to take. So when we are using the nature to cut down the trees for wood, for construction, with what, we also need to plant. Our former president, Daniel Arap Moi, brought about the issue of panda moja, then you cut one, you plant 2. So anytime you cut 1 tree, you have to plant 2. That died in Kenya. So one thing that needs to be done right now is ensuring that where are we and where does this rain started beating us? Because if we cannot sort the issue of the root causes, then we will just talk about these climate issues. But the displacement is causing a lot. When we check the stories of different civil society from coastal areas, because we hold a number of meetings in coastal areas, in asal areas, in central Kenya, and also in very dry places, you will definitely get very bad stories about migration. And the conflict between Kenya and Somali, conflict between interboundaries, and conflict between even Uganda and Kenya because of Lake Victoria is causing a lot of deaths. And that makes people to migrate. When they migrate, we lose a lot of livelihood because nobody will definitely take care of livelihood. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you mentioned all of these things. And Rose, I want to come to you because, you know, what Shakirul is trying to make the example of, like, what the system might classify as labor migration, we need to look at is this voluntary or is this more forced migration? Because when you look at what's going on in the countries like Bangladesh, and then you're seeing even here, right? People are always coming from countries that are on the front lines of the crisis, as I said. And with what you said too, it's easy to think about, oh, this is conflict migration, but if you don't look at the climate and how that's the livelihood loss and the loss of natural resources and how that's actually leading to a resurgence of conflict, which is what climate refugees discovered in Kenya as well in different parts. So I want to come to you. You do a lot of public speaking, Rose, about the intersection, the nexus of climate change and migration. And you come from Uganda, so you know this cross-border region very well. How important is it in forums like this for storytelling and for qualitative information like what we've seen and what we're also discussing here? How important is it to share that kind of information? What specifically, and how do we ensure that that kind of qualitative storytelling and information from impacted people actually make it into these spaces and into the data? So it's not just numbers, but it's also those qualitative stories.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with the movie star. Right. I think I'll just give you a very brief background. So, as you introduced, I'm Rose, and I'm from Uganda. And I work on the nexus of migration and climate change, refugees, as in what the convention says, but also the IDPs, flood, climate IDPs that you're calling climate refugees. And I was there, I was in an IDP camp in Uganda, in Western Uganda, in September, end of September. And these people had been displaced in 2020 during COVID. See how now the connection between, pandemic and crisis. And they went into this IDP camp, no plan at all, no nothing. And they've been there ever since. Temporary structure. They actually resettled them like 4 kilometers away from where they were displaced. So they weren't really resettled. They were just figure it out. So they constructed, structures and stuff, and they've been there ever since. And they've been calling for actual resettlement, and it has failed. No one is coming for their help, and because no one is coming for the help, there's no organization that's in charge of taking care of the IDPs. The government is like, well, we don't have enough resources, but also you're local people, you should figure it out. But how can someone figure out things when they woke up one day, they lost the breadwinner, they lost everything they had, and actually these people, I met this one woman who was a counselor. She had a good home, she had cows, she had livelihood, but all of a sudden she lost everything. And she had one daughter who was in school, who dropped out, and the next time I met her, she had a baby. So they are living in this, it's a terrible situation, that's what I'm trying to say. And they only live on hope, like someone will come for their rescue. And the good thing is, like, they're not expecting someone to come and save them. They just want a little bit of someone to enable them. And, they are working, they're hustling out. Most of them lost their jobs because no one is going to trust. You don't have a home anymore. So no one is going to trust you. You don't have an address. So, and so I work with a youth group there. And there's a session I talked during the Conference of Youth. I actually broke down because before I came to the session, these ladies sent me a video of how they have been displaced again within the camp. And they were like, we are being displaced to be displaced. So, and I saw children like running out of the houses falling down. They're not like really houses, but these temporary structures, muddy structures falling down. And to me, because I live so close, like I've not been climate displaced myself, but I live so close to this area and I can see it coming to me, closer and closer to my family. And also recognizing that any of us here could be a climate migrant the next day because you don't know when the disaster is going to hit. So in a country like Uganda and Kenya, our neighbors, we don't have the structures, the early warning systems, the social and economic safety nets for such people, but also the fact that there's no anyone coming out for the climate migrants. And I know there's a whole debate on, no, we shouldn't call them refugees, because I'm sure you've seen that debate and you're much aware. And I've been refraining myself from using climate refugees, but I know why they're pushing away the refugee aspect is to shift the responsibility. We know who is responsible for the climate crisis, don't we? And they also accept the responsibility because the science says so. So aren't they the same people responsible for the people that are being displaced? And also to remember that when we talk about migration, there's a way how the media and people think like Africans, sub-Saharan Africans, or whatever Africans are going to flood Europe or America. But when you look at the data, actually, compared to the rest of the world, Africa contributes about 14% or less of the migration in the world. And compared to Europe and Asia, who are in 20 something, people make it look like, and when you look at it again, absolutely no one will get on a small boat where the chances of survival is very low if they didn't have to.
Thank you, Rose. It's so absolutely true. Yeah, they didn't have to. Zinta, it's great to have you here. Do you want to come join us? So no, that's okay. That's actually, we're a couple minutes over. We have 2 minutes, I think. Yeah, is that okay? All right. Okay. Okay. Well, It looks like we have to end. Zinta, I'm going to ask you in 30 seconds. The IPCC has made it pretty clear that they would love to hear these stories. How do we get what Rose just said, what everybody said? How do we inject that into not just the IPCC, but into the entire space?
So first off, thanks very much, and apologies for being late.
problem.
We're working with some of the negotiators and UNHCR and others to try to get actually text on displacement into the GST, because this is certainly a group that's missing in the current decision text. So quickly about the IPCC, there's certainly an increasing call and recognition for the use of other forms of information aside from scientific literature, but including gray literature, indigenous knowledge, stories. And I think in the next cycle, we're very much looking forward to doing that and to trying to identify ways to better incorporate these stories. It can be both through the communication of the findings and involving community members in that, and also in the production of the report, and also in the report itself. Whether or not that's a specific chapter or incorporated throughout, I think that's something that we need to work with you to try to better identify how to do that. But for those of you who are working with government parties here, I definitely would advocate that you call on the IPCC to better reflect and encourage the use of a broader range of information. And that can be done, for example, in the plenary, which is taking place in January in Turkey. So we very much thank you, and we're here to help make sure that your voices are also better represented in some of the formal communications that come out.
Thank you, Zinta. You'll be hearing from, I think, all four of us, because we have reports and stories. So thank you for that opportunity, and we'll coordinate and be in touch. Thank you to everybody for being here. I hope you heard that call. IPCC would love to hear from you. Thank you for being here. Thank you, CVF. Thank you, ICSC. Thank you, Ghana. And good morning.